Welcome to another episode of Beautiful, Bad and Bizarre. Today we're here at the Chilterns Crematorium to bring flowers and to visit the final resting place of a comedy icon, Bob Monkhouse.
Good morning, sir. Why, it's Mr. Monkhouse.
Oh, you can call me Bob, or even better, you can call me after 6 o'clock.
Robert Allen Monkhouse was born in the early hours of June the 1st, 1928, at 168 Bromley Road, Beckenham, Kent. His father, Wilfred, was a chartered accountant. His mother, Dorothy, was strong-willed, composed and held high expectations. Affection was not her way, and hugs were rare in Bob's childhood. He was the younger of two brothers. His older brother, John, was born in 1922. As a child, Bob had a strong bond with his father, who was more affectionate and playful than his mother. But as time passed, the relationship with both of his parents began to sour, something that would impact his life for years to come. Bob only remembers his mother embracing him once as a child, and later said that he was thrilled beyond description. It happened during a tense moment in a Morrison air raid shelter during the war, when a flying bomb went off nearby. Yet even then her thoughts seemed more focused on her own mother, whom she feared might have been hurt, rather than comforting Bob. The few moments of comfort Bob did have in his childhood came from his grandfather, a kind and larger-than-life figure who ran the Monk and Glass custard powder factory. In his autobiography, Crying with Laughter, I'll leave the details in the description to this video, Bob Monkhouse recalled in his own words, "I was a very fat boy. Despite his mother's best efforts, strict diets, daily exercise, nothing seemed to work." Then, in 1937, while watching a parade pass by his house to celebrate the coronation of King George VI, 7-year-old Bob stood waving a flag when a man in the procession pointed at him and shouted, "Fatty Arbuckle!" Bob didn't know what it meant, but he felt the sting. Embarrassed, he retreated into the house and into his imagination. He'd always found comfort in writing and drawing, and was beginning a creative journey that would define the rest of his life. At aged 9, after a routine doctor's visit for a cut on his head, Bob was diagnosed with a thyroid condition. Medication quickly took effect, and as he entered adolescence, the weight, as he put it, melted away. Apart from 2 childhood holidays spent in Shanklin on the Isle of Wight, every other holiday for a fortnight every year was spent in Worthing at the Eardley House Hotel, which closed in 1988. It was demolished in 2008 and new flats were built. Just before World War II broke out, Bob's father bought a small house in West Worthing. Believing the war was imminent, in August 1939 he decided to move his family to the south coast for safety. The summer of 1940 was especially sunny. 12-year-old Bob spent a lot of time in the garden of their home at 4 Douglas Close. One day in July, while in the garden, Bob saw a dogfight in the sky between some RAF planes and a German aircraft that seemed to be in trouble. He watched as something fell from the German plane. Curious, Bob hopped on his bike and rode to the spot. Sure enough, he found it, a military mess tin, a grey metal box with a lid sitting at the end of a gravel drive. Inside were 3 photos, a coloured stone and a letter written in German on yellow paper. The photos showed a young man, a pretty young woman and a baby sitting on a rug in a garden. Bob carefully placed the box on his bike handlebars and cycled home. He learned that the German plane had crashed into the sea about 2 miles off the coast, and there were no survivors. No one knew about the box. Bob kept it hidden in his bedroom, wrapped in his winter coat, at the back of his cupboard. He spent hours trying to translate the letter, imagining it might be a romantic message, and he dreamed of returning it to the young woman in the photo. At the time, Bob was attending Goring Hall School, where one of his teachers, Mr. Hatfield, taught German. Bob didn't want to give up the original letter, so he carefully copied it and brought the copy to Mr. Hatfield, asking him to translate it. The teacher glanced at it, pocketed the letter, and said he'd talk to Bob about it later. When Bob got home from school, he found Mr. Hatfield and the headmaster, Mr. Green, sitting in the front room with his mother, who looked furious. They wanted to know why Bob had written those words. He told the truth, and after handing over the box and the original letter, he was sent to bed without supper as punishment. It turned out that the letter and its contents were part of a plan to encourage rebellion against the British government, asking the finder to support the German cause. The stone was revealed to be a valuable piece of red jasper from Roman times, and it was handed over to the crown. As a punishment, Bob was grounded, forced to go to bed early, and banned from trips to the Worthing Odeon cinema. While Bob's father was away working in London during the week and his brother was stationed in North Africa, he and his mother spent a lot of time together. Evenings were often spent by the wireless, sharing laughter over the comedy of stars like Tommy Handley. Their routine also included regular trips into Worthing Town, where they visited cinemas like the Odeon, which once stood in Liverpool Road, the Plaza in Rowlands Road, the Rivoli, where there is now a block of flats, and the Dome, which is still standing and functioning as a cinema. It was at these picture houses that Bob's deep love for film truly took root. With a burning passion for creativity, Bob was constantly writing and drawing. His mother, who also had her own artistic interests, supported his artistic obsessions, funding his endless requests for supplies. He'd already been crafting material and sending it to the BBC, optimistically addressing his work to Mr. Leonard Henry, famous comedian. In response, he received a polite but firm letter explaining that unsolicited scripts could not be returned without a stamped, self-addressed envelope. Undeterred, he rewrote his jokes, added fresh ideas to a third page, and enclosed the necessary envelope before trying again. Weeks passed with no reply. Refusing to give up, Bob took the advice of his English teacher and sent his material directly to Leonard Henry at the Concert Artists Association in London. At the same time, he persisted with the BBC, sending his jokes to Henry 9 times over. Then, one day after returning home from Goring Hall School, his mother greeted him with unexpected news. "Robert, you've got a letter." The notepaper was headed with the name Leonard Henry. It read, "Young man, please do not send me any more of your nonsense. For a boy of 12, you are a very persistent and impudent little fellow. I put you upon your honour to show this letter to your parents. To them I say this. If I had been such an arrogant child, my father would have administered corporal punishment. I say no more. Yours, etc., Leonard Henry." Despite the rather pompous rejection, young Robert was undeterred and continued to submit his cartoons and writing to various outlets. One such opportunity came from a greeting cards company, which paid him £1 for each of the 4 dozen card verses he contributed for Christmas cards. During previous holidays in the 1930s, Bob loved Worthing Pier's concert party called The Gay Parade, which featured Fred Gwynne's comic sketches. Most impressive was his imitation of a frog. However, the war caused the theatre on the pier to close, but by 1941 the Pier's Theatre reopened with a young talent contest where Bob performed, imitating the frog impressions of Fred Gwynne and catching a fly with his tongue. He won second prize. A few weeks later, Bob repeated his act on Uncle Bill Fraser's Saturday morning's children's fun show, earning half a crown. 13 years later, he hired Uncle Bill for his first TV series, where Bill became famous as Sergeant Snudge in the Army game. But to Bob, Bill's early encouragement, "You've got the makings, my lad, you've got the makings," meant everything. In 1942, the Monkhouse family returned to Beckenham, and Bob joined Dulwich College. A friend's father showed his drawings to cartoonist David Lowe, who later returned them with the note, "Sorry, no real promise here, Lowe." Despite his determination, rejection still took its toll. In his autobiography, Crying with Laughter, Bob recalled locking himself in the bathroom, sobbing into a towel so that his mother wouldn't hear him. After yet another setback, a failed audition at the Golders Green Hippodrome, he swore he'd never perform again. But that promise didn't last long. On his 16th birthday, he got a call offering him the chance to write thrillers and American-style detective stories for the troops. He bought his first typewriter, and within a year and a half, he had written around 30 of what he called terrible pulp novels. Around this time, Bob was also performing with youth clubs, gaining experience and refining his stage patter. By 1945, his confidence had grown, and he waited at stage doors offering jokes to comedians for sale. Max Miller, the famous cheeky chappie, bought a page of jokes for 5 shillings. 6 years later, when Bob opened a show at the London Coliseum, Max was on the bill. Bob thanked him for using his work, to which Max replied, "I'd have used more if you'd put your name and address on the page." Max went on to give Bob a masterclass in comedy that Bob was never to forget. In June 1946, Bob was called up to do 3 years of national service in the RAF, while he continued to write and perform and attend auditions for television and radio. While serving in the RAF, Bob met people who would shape the rest of his life. One of them was Dennis Goodwin, a fellow writer who had missed conscription due to health issues. Dennis had heard Bob on the radio, tracked him down, and the meeting sparked a creative partnership that lasted 15 years. They wrote comedy together, and Bob later wrote in his autobiography, "I came to love him as a brother, far more than I loved my natural brother." Dennis would struggle with serious mental health issues, which sadly led to an early death aged just 45, but more on that in a future video. During the same time period, Bob met Elizabeth Thompson, a WAF assigned to his department. She would become his future wife. And in 1948, he had a night out at the cinema that left an unexpected impression. The film was low budget, and frankly, Bob felt it was pretty awful. But it was Bob's first glimpse of Diana Dors on screen. The movie was Penny and the Pownall Case, and Diana was billed fourth, after Peggy Evans, Ralph Michael, and Christopher Lee. In the moment Bob Monkhouse saw Diana Dors on screen, he was captivated. "I became a fan of Diana Dors," he later said. And really, who could blame him? A few years later, in 1950, he got the chance to meet her in person. Diana was booked as a special guest on the radio show Calling All Forces, which Bob co-wrote with his now writing partner, Dennis Goodwin. She joined a lineup that included Ted Ray and Max Wall, and was an instant hit. Diana kept getting invited back, including a trip with the team to entertain the British troops stationed in Hamburg. Off-air, sparks flew. The chemistry between Bob and Diana was undeniable. But there was a problem. Both were married, Bob to his wife Elizabeth, and Diana to Dennis Hamilton, a man known for his jealousy and violent temper. Despite that, Bob and Diana grew close. She later said, "He attracted me enormously. Life with Dennis was intense, not in a good way, and Bob's intelligence, warmth and sensitivity stood out. Sundays at the Garrick Theatre became their haven, working together all day, free from Dennis's watchful eye. Diana described Bob as a man of warmth, kindness and enormous charm, a tonic and a temptation. She admitted, "We had a mutual attraction, but I should have known nothing stayed secret from Dennis for long." After one broadcast, Dennis erupted during a dinner party at their home, smashing furniture and accusing Diana of an affair she said she hadn't had, though perhaps she wished she had. A few weeks later, Diana received a huge basket of flowers in Bournemouth, where she was performing in Panto, with a loving cryptic message from Bob. Dennis exploded again. Diana admitted she sometimes imagined a different path, one where she and Bob became a showbiz duo. "We could have made a good team," she said. "Bob writing scripts for both of us to appear on television or in films." But they both knew it wasn't going to happen. Bob, ever cautious, was deeply wary of Dennis and what he might have been capable of. Still, the connection lingered for decades. He would later describe their bond as a strong mutual affection that lasted more than 30 years, and it was, as he put it, briefly supercharged one rainy Sunday in October 1953, a moment neither of them ever forgot. Years down the line, in the 1970s, Diana and her third husband, Alan Lake, were regulars at dinner parties hosted by Bob's second wife, Jackie. One evening, Diana turned to Jackie and said, "Do you know I was crazy about your old man years ago?" Jackie simply replied, "He says he felt the same about you." Diana smiled and gave Jackie a warm hug. 5th of November 1949, Bob had married Elizabeth at Caxton Hall in Westminster. His mother initially refused to attend, but was eventually persuaded, though she showed up in head-to-toe black, wearing a grim expression that said it all. The fallout from the wedding created a permanent rift between Bob and his parents. He never fully reconciled with his father and only made peace with his mother shortly before she passed away. Around this time, Bob signed a contract with the BBC to become one of two resident comedians. The other was none other than Terry Scott. In 1950, Bob also joined the cast of a revue alongside some big names, the legendary Tommy Cooper, the brilliant Moira Lister, who I absolutely adore, and Norman Wisdom, who Bob found a bit of a nightmare. In fact, he later joked that by the time the show folded, after just 6 weeks, he wanted to kill Norman Wisdom. While performing in cabaret, a passion he'd kept up through his life, Bob was also busy writing scripts with Dennis for other comedians. Bob's first son Gary would be born on the 24th of November 1951. His birth was premature, with Gary weighing just 2 pounds. He wasn't progressing as he should have, and so Elizabeth and Bob sought medical advice, and soon it was discovered that Gary had cerebral palsy. He was unable to speak and was deaf. Later, Bob would say Gary's life was a sustained refusal to give in on his disability. In him, one could see the innocence and vulnerability which the rest of us have only briefly and soon lose. In 1953, Bob was offered 6 45-minute comedy programmes the BBC wanted to call The Bob Monkhouse Show. Bob was over the moon, but he realised the name of the show would not be a good idea in a moment of unusual humbleness and not wanting to upset his writing partner Dennis. They settled on calling the show Fast and Loose. Though short-lived, Fast and Loose marked the beginning of a golden era for Bob's career, both in television and film. In September 1954, Elizabeth gave birth to their second son, who they named Simon. Throughout the late 50s and 60s, Bob would become one of Britain's most recognisable faces, not just for his comedy, but for his adaptability across the genres. Bob's parents had returned to Sussex, moving to a house called Madeira on Ashurst Drive, Goring by Sea, to live out the rest of their lives. Bob's father Wilf sadly passed away in 1957, having never reconciled with his son. That same year, Bob would appear in the very first Carry On Sergeant in 1957, and apparently after watching the morning's rushes, Peter Rogers came out of the projection room saying to Bob, "I'm more than delighted with you, my lad," slapping Bob on the back. "You're going to be my golden boy." Bob was never hired for a Carry On again. However, on the strength of Carry On Sergeant, Bob would co-write and star in a series of light-hearted comedies including Dentist in the Chair 1960 and Dentist on the Job 1961. And of course my personal favourite, Weekend with Lulu in 1961, where Bob played Fred Scrutton, with the absolutely first-class cast that included Leslie Phillips, who is featured on this channel, and I'll leave a link in the description to this video, also the wonderful Irene Handel, and the superbly talented and beautiful Shirley Eaton, to name just a few.
What are you doing? You just get your head down in the pit and have a good kip. I'm going to chat some of these lads in the village. Don't wait up for me. Extraordinary chap.
With a smile that could disarm and delivery as smooth as silk, Bob Monkhouse proved he could bring charm to the big screen just as easily as he did to TV. Bob continued to write prolifically behind the scenes, contributing jokes to some of the biggest names in comedy. Among them were some of my personal favourites, Les Dawson, Tommy Cooper, who I also have a video on this channel, Jimmy Tarbuck, and my great love, Frankie Howard. In 1956, Bob had taken his first step into what would become a defining arena for him, television game shows. That year he began hosting Do You Trust Your Wife?, the start of a long and celebrated journey in front of the camera. He followed this with Candid Camera in 1960 and 1961, bringing his trademark charm and ever-sharp wit, always staying one step ahead of the joke. Bob's personal life was also shifting. In 1959, he and his then wife Elizabeth adopted a baby girl named Abigail, expanding their family. But by the mid-1960s, his marriage was nearing its end. During this period, Bob grew close to a woman called Jackie, who would become his second wife, but more about that later. Then, in 1967, came the show that would cement his status as a national treasure, The Golden Shot. Broadcast live, it was chaotic, unpredictable, and absolutely perfect for Bob. His quick wit, effortless charm, and brilliance at improvisation truly came into their own, making the show a legend and Bob a household name. It was a pivotal year both professionally and personally, marking a profound turning point in his life. Encouraged by his mother's sister and Jackie, Bob wrote a letter to his estranged mother, a woman he hadn't spoken to in years. In it, he told her he loved her and longed to see her again. What came back was what Bob later described as a cautious letter, a tentative olive branch. But it was enough. She invited him to her home in Goring-by-Sea. Bob went, and a reconciliation took place. Just as he was leaving, he remembered her suddenly pulling him to her to hug him. He later said that he had always gone to embrace her, but had always been pushed away. What Bob didn't know, and what his mother didn't tell him, was that she was battling cancer and undergoing radiation treatment. She slipped into a coma late in 1968 and passed away in June 1969 in Worthing. After his mother's death, Bob was overwhelmed by grief and regret for the years and the moments they'd lost. In that heartbreak, work became his comfort. Being on stage, making people laugh, gave him purpose and a brief escape from the pain. In 1972, things took a turn behind the scenes at the Golden Shot. Tensions were rising and there were whispers of controversy. Some reports suggested Bob had been involved in irregularities with viewer competitions and giveaways. claims that he firmly denied. In fact, those who worked closely on the show later backed him up, saying it was more about ITV politics and a push for change than any real scandal. Despite the rumours, Bob was heartbroken when he was suddenly let go from the very show that he'd helped turn into a massive success. Reflecting on it years later, he said, "They didn't even let me do a farewell show. Just one day, that was it. Off." It was a painful exit, especially considering Bob had been regularly drawing in 16 to 18 million viewers. His successors, Norman Vaughan and Charlie Williams, never quite matched his charisma or popularity. Bob did make a short return to the Golden Shot in 1974, but by then the magic had faded. The show was cancelled the following year in 1975. The damage had already been done. During the 1970s and 80s, Bob continued his reign on the small screen with celebrity squares.
And here he is, the starmaster of celebs, the big square himself, Bob Monkhouse.
Oh, thank you. Nearly the late Bob Monkhouse.
As Bob's career soared, the pressures of fame and the demanding schedule began to take a toll on his personal life. His marriage to Elizabeth slowly fell apart, and by 1970 the couple had divorced, a painful chapter marked by personal regret and growing distance from his children. Now it has to be said, Bob's love life had always been complicated. Throughout his career, Bob Monkhouse was known for his womanising. He admitted to numerous affairs, once even claiming in an interview that he'd been with hundreds of women, an indulgence he reflected on later with some regret. He was a charming man and he knew how to use it. His dashing persona off stage often mirrored his on-stage confidence. He had a reputation with women that wasn't always savoury, and while we won't delve too deeply into all the details here, it's clear that side of his life brought its own share of challenges. But within the chaos, as previously mentioned, came Jackie Harding. Bob met Jackie while she was working as a secretary in television. She was calm, grounded and quietly strong. Their connection was instant. In 1973, the couple married, and Jackie became not just his wife, but his rock, standing by him through life's highs and lows. And one of those lows happened on the 11th of July 1977. Bob was arrested in a highly publicised case involving conspiracy charges related to his film collection. He was accused of conspiring to import copies of feature films belonging to Columbia, Warner and other film distributors without having the rights to do so. The films, however, were part of his personal archive, his lifelong obsession with preserving comedy history. He was brought to trial on the 6th of June 1979. After 11 days of what Bob called disagreeable absurdity, the judge dismissed the jury, declaring there was no case to answer, and though exonerated, the incident temporarily tarnished his reputation. Yet, as always, Bob bounced back. The 80s brought a renaissance. He returned to game shows with Family Fortunes, then Bob's Full House, restoring his reputation and reaching a new generation of viewers. His comedic timing remained impeccable, his professionalism unmatched. Sadly, tragedy was to strike Bob's life in the most devastating way. In 1992, his son Gary died suddenly in his sleep at the age of 41. Bob was devastated. "I was so close to Gary," he said. "I honestly believed he'd always be around. He had such willpower." Bob had been in the West Indies at the time and struggled to accept the news. He said, "They told me he didn't suffer, that he'd spent the day at the fair with a good friend. I do so hope that was true." Then, in 2001, tragedy struck again when Bob lost his other son Simon to a heroin overdose in a backpacker hostel in Thailand. He was 46. Simon, once a primary school teacher, was passionate about poetry, music and film. After taking redundancy, he set off to explore the world. His relationship with Bob had long been strained. Hoping to help, Bob once introduced Simon to a TV crew after he'd showed interest in becoming a cameraman. But Simon was told he was too short and his eyesight wasn't good enough. He felt humiliated and blamed Bob for the embarrassment. The gap between them widened. In his final year, Simon spoke publicly about his pain, calling Bob distant and controlling and sharing his hurt at being left out of his father's autobiography. Bob later reflected with deep regret. He was such a talented, funny boy, he said, but he struggled so much to cope with life. After the divorce, he took his mother's side. I didn't stop him. I thought she needed him. I regret that now very much. Hearing his son's poetry for the first time at the funeral. It was wonderful, very funny, brilliant, he said. He'd been performing in rooms above pubs and I had no idea. I would have gone anywhere to see him. For a man who spent his life making others laugh, grief became a quiet shadow that never truly left. 2001 was also the year Bob was diagnosed with prostate cancer. Despite the diagnosis, he kept working, his body frail but as sharp as ever in spirit. His final months were filled with courage, dignity and jokes.
The modern comedians, I find most of them pretty good. Although they will insist that they've made up certain phrases, that they've originated phrases, which they haven't. They think that they're the first ones to say, "Give it up, ladies and gentlemen. Hey, here he comes. Give it up. Give it up." People were saying to me, "Give it up," 50 years ago.
Bob Monkhouse passed away on December the 29th, 2003, aged 75. Tributes poured in from across the entertainment world. He was remembered not only for his extraordinary career, but for his generosity, his encyclopedic knowledge of comedy, and for being simply one of the greatest entertainers Britain ever produced. Bob Monkhouse's funeral was held here at the Chilterns Crematorium on Friday the 2nd of January 2004, and his ashes scattered in the beautiful Bluebell Woods on Thursday the 22nd of January 2004. Sadly, in 2008, aged 71, Bob's beloved wife Jackie passed away suddenly in her sleep at the couple's holiday home in Barbados. Friends said she died of a broken heart. Jackie was flown back to the UK for her funeral. Bob wrote Jackie an open letter in his autobiography that she didn't read until it was published. His final sentence was, "When two people love and need each other as much as we do, there can be no happy ending. But until then, every day I have with you is a present. I love you, Jack." Thank you so much for joining me today in this marvellous step back in time to remember the wonderful career and celebrate the life of the iconic and brilliant Bob Monkhouse. I hope you'll join me again in the next video.